U.S. President Joe Biden has ended his faltering reelection bid. In a post on X, the 81-year-old said he would stay in his role as president and commander-in-chief until his term ends in January. "It has been the greatest honor of my life to serve as your president," he said, while adding, "I believe it is in the best interest of my party and the country for me to stand down." He also endorsed Vice President Kamala Harris to replace him as the party's candidate.
They just paid 24% or 25%, either one of those numbers.
There's been a wave of public and private pressure from Democratic lawmakers and party officials for him to quit after his shockingly poor performance in a televised debate last month against Donald Trump, his Republican rival.
If we finally beat Medicare,
it took the spotlight away from Trump's false statements and put it squarely on Biden's fitness for another 4-year term. All his donors began to revolt.
ladies and gentlemen, President Putin.
Other gaffes at a NATO summit did not help either. He invoked Russian President Vladimir Putin's name when he meant Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and called Harris Vice President Trump.
I wouldn't have picked Vice President Trump to be vice president.
When you get knocked down, you get back up.
Biden initially resisted pressure to step aside and sat down for rare television interviews. But polls showed Trump's lead in key battleground states widening, and Democrats began to fear a wipeout in the House and Senate. Just days ago, Biden was diagnosed with COVID-19.
Trump wanted to run against Biden.
Darrell West with the Brookings Institution says Biden's move creates problems for the Republicans, at least in the short term.
They're just going to have to recast the whole thrust of their campaign, which was saying Joe Biden was too old, he couldn't do the job, his family was corrupt. All that disappears now.
For his part, Trump told CNN on Sunday that he believed Harris would be easier to defeat in the November 5th election. It's unclear whether other senior Democrats might challenge Harris for the nomination or if the party would choose to open the field for nominations. Biden is the first sitting president to give up his party's nomination for re-election since President Lyndon Johnson in 1968. And it leaves his replacement with less than 4 months to wage a campaign.
Joe Biden has ended his bid for a second term in the White House. In a statement, he said, "While it has been my intention to seek re-election, I believe it is in the best interest of my party and the country for me to stand down." Then came the official endorsement for Kamala Harris to step into his shoes. Biden has given Harris his full support. He said, "Democrats, it's time to come together and beat Trump. Let's do this." But Kamala Harris's path is not a done deal. Biden's endorsement does not automatically mean Harris has the job. Over the next coming days, Harris could well be challenged by members of the Democratic Party who feel the job should really be theirs. The reason, it is not the same process where if the US president steps aside, his vice president is next in line. This is a completely different scenario. No one becomes the official presidential nominee of a party until delegates vote. And here's the catch. Delegates are free to vote for any candidate they like.
Now that President Joe Biden has opted against continuing his re-election bid, it creates what is technically an open convention in Chicago next month. He has endorsed Vice President Harris. There's going to be some closing of ranks that we are already seeing immediately, but there are party officials, party leaders around the country that want a true open process with multiple candidates. This is quite obviously such a moment in American politics and American history. There's not an obvious precedent. The closest thing to it was 1968, when President Johnson at the time opted, after primaries had begun, to state that he would not seek or accept his nomination, and that opened up the process for his party. This is different. We're going to see, even if Harris closes ranks, there's an obvious question of who her running mate would be and what that looks like. Does she wait? Does she make that announcement now as a part of trying to unify the party more quickly, or does she strike out on her own to shore up support and then name someone at the convention or immediately prior to the convention. There are a lot of questions here.
More aligned could we be than to have the Vice President of the United States here?
Madam Vice President?
So there's a lot up in the air, but one thing is clear. The nominee, whether it is Vice President Harris or anyone else, still has to get a majority of the delegates' votes in some official capacity, whether before the convention or at the convention, because President Biden had to do that too. He had secured the commitments through the primary process, but had not yet been ratified as the nominee.
We beat Donald Trump once and we're going to beat him again.
It is important to note that Biden's endorsement of Harris is just a political statement. There is nothing legal attached to it under the Democratic rules. He had secured the delegates by running in all of those primaries earlier this year. He can release those delegates. He cannot legally obligate them to anyone else. That said, it is obvious that a sitting president's endorsement is important. President Biden was pressured to rethink this race because of his age and concerns about his viability as a candidate, but he still has a deep well of goodwill across the party, and his opinion matters. You are seeing almost immediately statements of support, first and foremost, for President Biden and kind of protecting his legacy and elevating him as a statesman. That's an effort we're seeing. And then secondarily, to more or less ratify what Biden has said in his endorsement of Harris, that she is the standard bearer now. You're going to see a lot of that. The question is how widely, how quickly that goes. And then another thing to watch for is whether any other high-profile Democrat is willing to challenge her, because even the delegates who want a choice may ultimately not get one, because it's a real calculation for someone like Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, Gretchen Whitmer, the governor of Michigan, J.B. Pritzker, the governor of Illinois. Do you want to take on a barrier-breaking, historic vice president who has the endorsement of the sitting president? Do you want to pick that fight? Be the underdog, risk losing it, and then perhaps affect your viability going forward? These are all calculated politicians that are thinking, hey, would I love to run in 24? Sure. But can I run in 24 in a way that makes it impossible for me to run in 2028 or 2032? And you're going to see those kinds of behind the scenes calculations. And it may be that some of that closing of ranks becomes obvious simply because no one is going to say, sure, I want to run against Kamala Harris.